is so insane.
I got married to a Funko Pop. Whoa. We got wedded, conjoined in a Subway shop. Whoa. I'm married to my Funko Pop. Whoa. We got joined, coitus in a Subway shop. Whoa. Vitamins and biscuits and minerals, they come to me through a tube. My whole life is spent watching on a tube. Whoa. Whoa. I'm married to a Funko Pop. Whoa. We got wedded, we got joined in a Subway shop. Whoa. Vitamins and minerals, they come to me through a tube. Vitamins and minerals, they come from me through this here tube. Whoa. I got married to my Funko Pop. Whoa. We got wedded, we got joined in a Subway shop. Whoa.
I want to show off something that we're all proud of. I got a browser here. This is Dyer.
Got married to a Funko Pop. We got wedded, conjoined in a Subway shop. I'm married to a Funko Pop. Vitamins and minerals, they come to me through a tube. My whole life is spent watching on a tube. Whoa. We got wedded coitus in a Subway shop. We got wedded coitus in a Subway shop. We got wedded coitus in a Subway shop. married to a Funko Pop. Oh, oh, oh. Ooh. We got credit cone joined in a Subway shop. Oh, oh, oh. Ooh, oh. I'm married to a Funko Pop. Oh, oh, oh. Ooh, oh, oh. Vitamins and minerals, they come to me through a tube. My whole life is spent watching on the tube. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Funko, oh, 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 oh. We got red and gold toys to send a Subway shop. Oh, oh, oh. Ooh, oh, oh. We got wedding photos in a Subway shop. Oh, oh, oh. Ooh.
Welcome, everybody. I wanted to remind you that you are my little internet children, and I'm wearing a wholesome button-up dadcore button-up. Perhaps something that your own daddies wear. I'm not physically, biologically your daddy, although some of you might want to check with your mom to make sure that that is or isn't the case. I am, however, your mind daddy today, and just think of me as a wholesome, dadcore, button-up kind of dude today. Today we're going to have a nice, chill conversation about the Tavistock Institute, the world's foremost brainwashing entity. Now, I know for sure that I did an analysis of this because I have a ton of notes. But I don't know where that analysis is. I want to say that maybe something happened to where I had to make it a private talk. I don't remember. Seems like maybe a year ago we covered this. But I couldn't find where I covered it. So I began reading another book, as you guys know, which I have mentioned off and on. And I'm just kind of reading this one here and there, various chapters. And this is Coleman's book on socialism, one world order, socialist dictatorship, and it's yet another history of the of Fabian socialism. And of course, yes, it does connect directly to the Rothschild Empire. So that is part of this story. But this book goes really deep into the history of the FDR period, and then prior to that, Woodrow Wilson, and how Wilson and FDR were really the central pivot figures to move America into socialism. And of course, you guys know that today we live definitely under an America that is heavily socialized in the classical Fabian socialist sense, not in a outright hardcore Marxist sense. And one thing that I appreciate about Dr. Coleman, whatever you think about him, and we do have criticisms that we're going to make. So we'll get to that right away at the very beginning before you just assume that I'm taking wholesale everything that Coleman says. I'm very aware of the criticisms, and I have criticisms too of his books, the weaknesses. He does point out that I think is worth giving him credit for on the back of the book, which he wrote this in 1998. He said, while our attention was focused on communism in Moscow, It was actually the socialists in Washington that were actually stealing America. So he was on the right track, okay? And he did get some things wrong. He made some goofy mistakes. Now, I'm very aware of Richard Grove's criticisms. I've had long conversations with Richard Grove about this book and Coleman's other books. And particularly, as you guys know, we did do a full lecture through Committee of 300 maybe a year ago. But what's come back into print recently is his Tavistock book. And this was out of print for about 10 years. You could not find this book for about 10 years. My allergies are going crazy due to the cocaine that I snorted in giant Tony Montana style pile. I got a Tony Montana style pile of cocaine. Now I'm about to do a bunch of Rogaine. Now I'm about to have a migraine. Y'all like that freestyle? Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. We did do a talk through this book. Again, a year. I don't know where that talk is. I have no idea. I mean, I think it's somewhere, maybe for members, but I want to compare it to the official history of Tavistock. So we're going to see what did Coleman get correct? What things lined up? Now that H.V. Dix, he's an actual person from Tavistock, and he wrote this history in 1970. It's published by Routledge, which is an academic system-based publication. And we're going to notice that a lot of the key characters that are mentioned by Coleman absolutely make up the official history of Tavistock. And so we'll look at a little bit of that and the members involved. But the reason we're talking about Tavistock is because we couldn't get to where we are without a lot of cunning, strategy, planning, and tactics. Now remember, most of the right-wing people today, the normie conservative world, still has not figured out that it's actually a designed plan of what happened. They think that it's just one damn thing after another in history. There's no strategy, there's no cunning, there's no organizational structure or plan to a long-term destabilization and destruction of Western civilization. And so what we do, as you know, is we lecture through on my channel. One of the things we do, we lecture through the writings of the elite from their perspective. That's the majority of the big texts that we've lectured through. This is the Global Elite Book Series. Man, my allergies are going crazy today. And every now and then we do kind of step into the domain of the prophetic conspiracy theorizers. And one of those that's very famous and been around for a long time is Dr. John Coleman. Now, we don't exactly know for sure if Dr. John Coleman really was in British intelligence. This is his claim. I'm not saying that he wasn't, but I'm not saying that he was. We don't exactly know. What we have are many of his books. If you remember back in the day, in the old school Lord Voldemort days, before Dr. Coleman passed away, he was on Lord Voldemort many times. I remember listening to many interviews with Dr. John Coleman. And there's a couple key criticisms we want to make. First of all, it would have been good, and again, he was boomer, or maybe even a little older than boomer, so he wasn't really interested in kind of sourcing or validating the claims. It was just kind of like, hey, I was in British intelligence and I saw a lot of things and blah, blah, blah. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't, right? But here's the thing about the boomer era of this type of crew. I would say he's above the Fritz Springmeier class of people, right? There's definitely there's a lot more meat going on here than what we would get from, say, Fritz. And I'm not saying everything Fritz said was wrong, but there's a lot of kooky stuff in there. And there's a lot of reliance on very goofy, shady sources, right? Like John Todd, who's obviously a kind of a quack con man. And I think it really shot the Bloodlines book in the foot for him to rely on these sort of dubious characters. But I will say, first of all, that it's not the case that Coleman has no bibliography. the mistake was that he didn't actually source the book very well in the actual pages of the book, and maybe that was whoever printed it. But there is a bibliography. Okay, so let's see, first of all, maybe let's make this full screen. So you can see we do have a bibliography. There are quite a few sourced elite texts. They're not conspiracy texts. Most of these are, in this book, Tavistock publications. We have a lot of the texts that I cover, like Bernays and so forth. We've lectured through Bernays. We've lectured through some of these other things. Dr. Kurt Lewin. So we've got Tavistock and Frankfurt School people referenced as sources. We've got some of the social engineering elites that you've heard me talk about for a long time. We've got Brzezinski. We've got Hadley Cantrill. We've got Krupskaya. We've got Huxley. Okay, these are all sources in the bibliography of Tavistock. We've got Dr. Gregory Bateson, key MKUltra doctor as well, source documents, source works. We've got Margaret Mead, Artie Lang, FDR. We've got several other Tavistock adjacent publications about the organizational man, the company man, this kind of stuff. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages of bibliography. That's not too bad. Okay, so that's not terrible. It would have been nice if he had footnoted within the text, but he didn't do that. He just wrote the book, and he does have a lot of citations, but we don't know where those citations come from. So, for example, here he cites Tavistock luminary John Rawlings Rees, but he doesn't really tell us where that comes from. He just says the 1954 from Rees. Okay, so that's a valid criticism. The other books are kind of similar. For example, in the One World Socialist book, we do have an end notes of sorts. So you'll notice that we do have sources. We have a lot of CFR publications. This book has a tremendous amount of Fabian Society publications. So very well sourced in that regard, because this book largely argues that socialism in America was successful through the Fabians. So here we have, again, another page of bibliography. He does discuss the role of Ralph Child of Zionism plays a role. Another page of sources. So, is it the case that there's no sources? Well, let's look at the other book, the Committee of 300, probably the most controversial of the books. And it does have a bibliography. Now, this one, I would argue, is a little more meaty. The sources here are actually a little bit better. He even begins his sources by saying 1984 is actually a source for Fabian socialist ideology, which is something that we've been arguing as well. So, you'll notice we have a lot of older publications about the British Empire, and opium plays a big role in this book. I actually bought a couple of these old publications that I could find that he mentions. Felix Frankfurter, he argues, plays a big role. Another one of the key characters that he identifies that the Rakovsky interrogation identified, which again makes me think there's probably something to this, is Bruce Lockhart, Memoirs of a British Agent. And he, as you guys remember, was one of the key operatives working to be a liaison between Lord Milner and the Bolsheviks for British intelligence. Now, the public story was that most of British intelligence, and many of them I think really did, hate and oppose the Bolsheviks. But Lord Milner, because he was not necessarily opposed to Bolshevism, he was a Fabian, he wanted a positive relationship secretly with Bolsheviks, and the key operative for that was Bruce Lockhart. And again, this is correct. I bought a very rare publication of the memoirs of British intelligence operative Bruce Lockhart. This was the guy that I couldn't think of his name when we were doing the discussion with Tristan. He's not a journalist, he's a British spy. Now, I have this mainline publication, but the mainline publication is, I would imagine, kind of whitewashed. But you see this right here, British Agent by R.H. Bruce Lockhart. I bought that. So I have that text. And in the last chapter, he discusses his being in Moscow during the Bolshevik period. Sorry, I meant to flip over to this. There it is. As you can see, that's Bruce Lockhart. He's not a journalist. He's one of the most famous, lesser-known British spies. And also someone kind of at the level of Bruce Lockhart is Sidney Riley, as we talked about, the character who plays a very key role in influencing James Bond. Sidney Riley, of course, was a Jewish spy for the British Empire who, what do you know, he plays both sides. Is he against the Soviets? Is he pro-Soviet? Well, he's kind of like Lord Victor Rothschild. He seems to be on both sides. But to get back to the Coleman book, he mentions a lot of the texts that you would hear me mention. Quigley, texts that we've gone through. All the Cecil Rhodes texts are there. Now, you understand, this is not conspiracy theory. This is actually mainline intelligence history from Lockhart's own memoirs, that he was the liaison to the Bolsheviks secretly for the British government. So what else do we have in... we have Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann. Turns out this is a key Tavistock text, and that's correct. So Coleman is correct about that. We have the whole history of Stanford Research Institute. Paul Ehrlich. The Malthusians are mentioned. History of the Rockefeller family, all mentioned. Brzezinski comes up again. Diaries of Bruce Lockhart, which I just mentioned. Edward Bernays' Engineering of Consent. Malachi Martin's History of the Jesuits, which is an odd one. I didn't expect that to be here, but it does play a role because, of course, the Jesuits did, as we know from the Wemhoff book, align themselves directly with the CIA, in America at least, through John Courtney Murray and others at the time of Vatican II. And that is why Vatican II was able to push through so many things, so to speak, that were amenable to Americanism and the CIA. So we're going pretty deep today. By the way, props to all you Bitcoin maxis and Bitcoin holders, because we had yet another all-time high today. So we're looking forward to that 100K coming pretty soon, I feel sure. History of the Huxley family is in here. Limits to Growth, classics of the global elites, roundtable groups, roundtable movement. Jeremy Bentham, the famous utilitarian PDF. Humanistic Psychology, Hadley Cantrell, Institute for Pacific Relations, Institute for Social Research. So I think that we could say that Coleman's book has flaws, but here's the thing. Overall, he pretty much got what the story was correct. Oh, the other thing that's kind of embarrassing is that he claims that the Frankfurt School guys like Adorno wrote the Beatles songs. I'm not convinced of that. I've never seen evidence of that. That's just kind of an outlandish claim. It's just an assertion that he makes. So I think in a few places here and there, Coleman will be pretty much on the right track, but then he'll kind of make these leaps. And we see this, unfortunately, in a lot of this domain, right? Alternative media and the so-called conspiracy sphere. We've talked about two key fallacies that are always there, that you always have to watch out for. If you guys remember, they are I'm going to mention the two, and then I want to add a third one. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy and the gambler's fallacy. Those are very common in the conspiracy analysis domain, and they're really just kind of variations of because something happened in the past or because I'm very close, then therefore this must have been the case and this must be the conclusion, right? But just because you rolled the number 5 3 times in a row, there's nothing that dictates that you will roll a 5 the 4th time, right? It's a non sequitur. And so likewise, because people are associated, it doesn't necessarily follow that they are consciously involved in furthering the same agenda. They may or they may not be. And even being invited to different global events or soirees or whatever does not necessarily mean that you knew what's going on or you were fully aware or you were party to the conspiracy. That's why we have to be very precise and not lump people together. For example, I get lumped in all the time with all kinds of crazy stuff. Oh, one time in 2016, you went on this podcast, therefore you work with these people, right? You must be party to their conspiracy. And it's just, simply not the case. For example, I went on some podcasts in 2016-17, and the people whose podcasts I went on, they went in a totally different direction. I don't have any personal fallout or animosity with these people, but for example, certain podcasts went in the direction of neo-paganism. I don't believe in neo-paganism, and I tried to argue and sort of nudge people out of the neo-pagan domain, and those individuals continued in that direction, and so I didn't go on that podcast anymore. But it has nothing. It's like I didn't fall out with it, have some big fight or something like that. It's just that's not the direction that I'm going in, and that's not what I believe. So you see but people are they could still say, oh, well, you see, you're associated with them because of a podcast where they interviewed you in 2016. But it doesn't follow from that I'm on the same page or that I agree or whatever. Oh, no, I'm talking about 2016, man. I'm talking about way before any of this stuff. But you see what I'm saying is you might could say, well, he was on that podcast, so they worked together. Well, it would be a non sequitur because I'm telling you what was really going on was, I went on a podcast multiple times and I explained to them this and that and I disagree, and then we just went in different directions. So there's always this, and the left does this too. Everybody knows the left does this, right? Where they say, oh, you went on whatever, so you're part of a, right-wing, whatever, fascist organization because you had a conversation with somebody on this podcast 7 years ago. It's guilt by association, right? No, it wasn't David Icke. I've never talked to David Icke directly. He used to link my film analyses forever. I mean, I don't even know if maybe it was his webmaster. I don't know if it was David Icke doing it, but I'd say 10 years ago, I would get a lot of David Icke links, and I never interacted with David Icke. He would just link my analyses. So I will say for in the case of David Icke, though, no, of course it's not Sam Hyde. I went on Sam Hyde a few months ago. I would easily go back on Sam Hyde's podcast. And by the way, if you would like to see me as part of the $1 Million Extreme Sam Hyde universe, tell Sam Hyde that. No, I'm talking about people. He didn't even have a show at this time. I'm talking about 2016, guys. Anyway, to get back to John Coleman, I agree with Richard's critique that there's definitely some leaps that are made and some claims that are not the case. But remember, just because boomer era analysts kind of had that common mistake doesn't mean that we can't derive and see and appreciate what they got right. I'm not convinced, and I don't think that Adorno wrote all the Beatles songs. To me, that sounds ridiculous. Could Tavistock have played a role in furthering the importation of Far Eastern ideologies into rock and roll music in the 1960s in the UK? Yes, I think that's very plausible. But I don't think that we could conclude without some kind of proof. Now, I read a long paper years ago that Adorno wrote about music. And the interesting thing about Adorno was who's the fourth member of MDE? Is Alex, is he the fourth? Schultz? Who's I think, yeah. Tweet at Sam and everybody that maybe it's time to recruit. You know what I'm saying? Maybe there needs to be a recruitment process. Maybe there needs to be tryouts. What if there was a Survivor style tryout? Maybe you should tell Samuel J. Heidenstein that very thing. Let's see if we can find that beautiful Twitter account over here. By the way, if you're not following this man over here on Twitter, you should. This beautiful Afrocentric individual, my beautiful Nubian brother, Samuel Heidenstein. You could follow him right there. Tell Sam Hyde that maybe there needs to be a new person, you know what I'm saying, like a new member. Anyway, let's get back to what we were talking about. Okay, enough of this, right? You guys get the point, right? So, yeah, we have we can appreciate Dr. Coleman's books. We don't know if he really was as deep as he was into British intelligence. I can tell you that as I work through and double check the references that I found and that I can so far, I'd say he's about 80 to 85% accurate so far. So I've not seen any huge mistakes that would disqualify everything that Coleman says. Maybe somebody can just debunk it. Richard did send me a video of a British colonel or general, I forget what his role was, debunking. The problem was that the debunking was really just everything this guy was saying was his word against Coleman's, and a lot of the claims that he was making against Coleman were actually things that I could go and verify. So it's nice to actually have the H.V. Dick's History of Tavistock, which actually wasn't reprinted until pretty recently. I mean, this came out in 1970. This was reprinted in 2015. So we didn't actually have like an official history of Tavistock, I don't think, that was easily accessible until about 2015 when this came out. So let's get into the Tavistock book, and let's look at some of the theorists and their claims. Now, the other thing is that we also have the Ratio book, which came out a couple years ago, that we've covered, and that also backs up a lot of the research about the Fabian Society being very central to the socializing of America and the leftist takeover. And it's not divorced from what you're seeing here with the Vatican II stuff, because Coleman, for example, has an entire chapter where he argues about the history of ecumenism. And as you've heard me say, and as the Ratio book says, ecumenism was a Rockefeller Fabian socialist project to, quote, permeate and penetrate the religious sphere. This began with entities like the Riverside Church that the Rockefellers put millions of dollars into. They created their own Protestant church. That is the Protestant church, the evangelical made-up church, as you guys remember, that has a statue of Darwin, a statue of Jesus, a statue of Hegel, a statue of Buddha and Moses. Okay, literally. In the giant Rockefeller, they built their own Protestant cathedral. It's called Riverside Church. The idea was that the church should be converted into a soft socialist institution, not a full-on bloody Marxist institution, but a turn the church socialist. And one of the key Council on Foreign Relations individuals who helped to push this was a famous Protestant liberal. You probably have heard of him. Back in the days of, I haven't actually read this person because I never found it at all interesting or worthwhile to read. These sort of boring liberal boomer Protestants. But one of the most famous is Reinhold Niebuhr, and he was a Union Theological Seminary. Now, if you don't know, Union Theological Seminary was essentially a Rockefeller-created seminary. It was one of the key institutions that they created to liberalize and socialize the Protestant church in America. The Rockefellers found it much easier to, at first, through this model, liberalize and socialize Protestantism because it was so kind of fragmented. Right, all you had to do is just basically put money into, throw $10 million over here, build a seminary, and you can control who's has the chair of it, each department, et cetera, et cetera. And so, starting as a minister with working class sympathies, he shared with many others a commitment to, you got it, pacifism and socialism. So immediately we have the Kuckianity principles here that all Kuckianity principle people believe: socialism and pacifism. Niebuhr was a promoter and a fan of the social gospel, and the definition of true religion, again, is essentially just a kind of socialism. And he ends up being a tremendous influence on a lot of the normie NPC leaders that you might expect. Martin Luther King Jr., Hillary Clinton, Hubert Humphrey, Dean Acheson, Obama. A big fan of Reinhold Niebuhr. My wife, Michael, and Reinhold Niebuhr hold a special place in my heart. We've got Jimmy Carter, even Jimmy Carter, right? Niebuhr was also influential on the right in the United States, and the Institute of Religion and Democracy was a conservative think tank that adopted his notion of, quote, Christian realism. In other words, social gospel that doesn't care about theology or, dogmatic issues or belief in the supernatural. It's just a move towards making the church a NGO, basically. So you can see why this person would be promoted. And of course, he serves as professor at Harvard and Princeton. These are classic OSS-CA universities. And these are institutions from which we get so much of today's liberalizing and socializing tendencies amongst the Ivy League power elite. So the plan was to, again, turn the church through socialization and liberation theology into a socialist institution, and they were very successful in doing this. They started a group called the Fellowship of Faiths. And the Fellowship of Faiths was an ecumenist organization committed to the unification of the world religions. In fact, they began to discuss in the late 1890s and the early 1900s this process of unifying all the world religions through some form of ecumenism. We've covered this many times. This is pre-Niebuhr. This is going back to, you maybe have heard of this, but the World Parliament of Religions in 1893. This was a conference that was put on in 1893, and this led to a series of conferences and meetings in 1904 in Paris, International Congress of the History of Religions, in London in 1924, the Living Religions of the Empire, the British Empire, in 1913 in Chicago, 1934, the Congress World Fellowship of Faiths, and many of the attendees, including many of the women that attended, were open socialists. So this was a rabid socialist hive, so to speak, but not only socialists. Many people may not have been socialists at all. But this was also supported by Annie Besant, the famous Fabian, who talked about a 10-point plan to destroy Christianity in the West and replace it with the New Age. And people like Samuel Untermeyer, I think the famous Zionist, yes, and Madame Blavatsky also played a role in theosophy being used as a kind of placeholder or a kind of structure that might be used to unify all these world religions. So eventually the Fellowship of Faiths turns into something you may have heard of. It's called the World Council of Churches. The World Council of Churches is a heavily Rockefeller and United Nations based institute that was run at first by a guy connected with British intelligence, Wim Visserhooft, if I remember his name correctly. Visserhooft. He's like a weird Dutch guy. And money for these organizations, as we said, came from entities like the Laura Spelman Fund, the Carnegie Endowment, and the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation. And if you know, as you guys know, this is all backed up in the gigantic official history of the Rockefeller family. That's one of the key texts, the Collier and Horowitz text, that I first got back in 2005. And when I bought that book, I read a bunch of it, and that's when I first called into Lord Voldemort. I think those clips are gone, but some of you may have even heard these, right? Where I called in at the time, and Alex said, hey, this is really interesting information. Why don't you write an article? I wrote a long article about the Rockefeller and Cecil Rhodes and Rothschild families, and eventually that's my introduction to writing a few articles back in the day for INFO Wars. But eventually, the strategy for this movement, this eventually included things like the Baha'i faith. Baha'i was a huge test bed where they thought they might be able to utilize Baha'i as a potential future world religion. Theosophy, as you guys know, Quigley says one of the potential contenders for one of the controlled future world religions was actually Christian Science, which didn't take off, but I think it did claim a few Hollywood people. So we got Christian Science ended up getting Val Kilmer. We covered this not too long ago. Christian Science. It was actually more Hollywood people than I expected. And Christian Science is kind of a stupid, kind of mentalism cult. It's kind of dumb. But it did apparently include... No. This is pulling up Christian Scientists. Here we go. So one of the reasons why was that Nancy Astor of the Astor family was a member of Christian Science. And so because she was in the elite circles, she was one of the key people pushing this. That's why at the time of the Cliveden set, etc., the Astors, they thought this might be the potential future world religion. I saw some article claiming Joan Crawford. I don't know if that's true. But we all know probably the most famous member of Christian Science nowadays is Val Kilmer. Let's see. This claims Carol Channing, Joan Crawford, Doris Day, Robert Duvall. I didn't know that. Interesting. Allegedly Kelsey Grammer, Howard Hawks. That's interesting. Val Kilmer, Ginger Rogers. Interesting. So what you notice about Mary Pickford. So a lot of these early old school Hollywood people, and one of the reasons that they did this, I think, is similar to the model of what Scientology did, right? Where what Scientology did was say, why don't we just recruit a bunch of famous people, and then that'll dupe everybody into joining our cult. Let's see, musicians. Bruce Hornsby. Wow, that's a weird one. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. Oh, don't you believe? Anyway, but I guess the saddest part of all of that is Mad Mardigan. Mad Mardigan, what are you doing in Christian Science, bro? You are a hero to all 80s children. How could you be in Christian Science? Willow! Willow! Monmonigan! Let's all pray that Val Kilmer leaves this horrible cult. Anyway, for those that don't know, Christian Science is just like a dumb mentalism cult where they're like, they don't believe in the deity of Christ or anything, but it's like, oh, you don't need doctors, you just kind of like think and heal yourself. So it's like, anyway, this didn't end up catching on, but you can see the pattern here is that they're sort of testing the waters, looking for the future world religion. Will it be Theosophy? Will it be the New Age movement that births the New Age movement? Will it be Baha'i? Will it be Christian Science? What's it going to be? It's got to be something that can have like big reach, right? Or will it be the new Vatican, the monotheistic world religion Vatican that we now have with the Abu Dhabi Faith Center, right? We've got a lot of different possibilities. The Fellowship of Faiths merged with World Zionism and then the League of Nations, and then the Baha'i movement emerged in England, and it formed itself into the Oxford Group, which was succeeded by the Moral Rearmament. Following the close of World War II, all of these groups played a key role in the formation of the United Nations. But really, these were all just socialists, loosely speaking. And so we have the ACLU, the Committee for Economic Development, the Whole House, National Council for Women, League of Industrial Democracy, Social Democrats. Social Democrats, that's actually like, that overlaps with David Bentley Hart, AOC, right? NATO, Institute for Policy Studies, Club of Rome, Cambridge Policy Study Institute, Lucius Trust, Aspen Institute, Stanford Research, National Organization of Women, etc. He argues that all of these were essentially socialist entities that emerged at this time out of this domain of permeating and penetrating the religious sphere. And they could not have done this without large-scale, gigantor money support. But how do you get everybody on board with this? Because even if you're rich, you got zillions of dollars, you can't just do whatever you want. You really got to have mass appeal and mass support. You got to have the masses on board. That's really crucial. So the way to do that is to figure out in a scientific way all the techniques, tactics, tricks, and scientific procedures of social engineering, mind control, and manipulation. That's where mass media comes in to play a key role. And the early phases of mass media at the turn of the last century were the printing press, books, right? That was the main forms of mass media back then. And they quickly understood that they could easily control those entities without much difficulty. And so before the Tavistock Institute was set up, we have this very important entity called Wellington House. And Wellington House was the base from which the British government... Why can I not spell? The British government set up its World War I propaganda bureau. So, most of the early phases of the research, and PayPal won't let me donate to Streamlabs. I think you have to. Is there something going on? Is it not working? I mean, I just had Hades Undead sent a super chat. Says, I don't have a father, so I'll make you my internet dad for now. Here's $10 for this dad shirt. Dyer going dad mode. Thank you so much, Hades. You should be able to send a super chat through either PayPal or a credit card through that right there. If it's credit card, I think you have to use Stripe. So, but yeah, you can send a super chat right there through Streamlabs. It should be working because somebody just sent one. Now, Wellington House, as we know, was this early 1914 era propaganda agency where David Lloyd George, Chancellor of the Exchequer, was given the task of setting up a British war propaganda bureau, together with the Liberal MP Charles Masterman. And by the way, these are Fabians. Who do we have at Wellington House? Well, guess what? It's a lot of people you might expect. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, G.K. Chesterton, Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, Thomas Hardy. Now, wait a minute. A lot of these people are fiction writers. Absolutely. Of course, you're going to have a bunch of fiction writers and British spy fiction writers doing your propaganda. Who else would write propaganda? And they came up with this thing called the Reece Report, R-E-E-C-E. This is not the Reece Committee. That's much later on in America. The Reece Report was a made-up, totally fictitious report. Excuse me, Bryce Report. I said Reece. Bryce Report, B-R-Y-C-E. Of German outrages. The Kaiser is horrible. He's just butchering people. And in fact, it is well known nowadays, as even this talks about, these are famous invented atrocities that make it an often cited example of warfare, wartime, psychological warfare and propaganda. So this is just propaganda. It's not real. It's wartime propaganda made up at the time of World War I at Wellington House to get support, first, of the British people for World War I. Now, this is, again, the early phase, and it ends up eventually being successful because Lord Northcliffe, who was the owner of the Times and the Daily Mail, was put in charge of enemy propaganda. And all of this is what is talked about in Coleman's book. This is all accurate. So there doesn't seem to be much contention about these mainline historical accounts of Wellington House. And this becomes, via Lord Northcliffe and others, the entity that will morph into Tavistock. So again, we're just looking at even the mainline stuff that's not even controversial, but pretty much admits everything that we're talking about. Now, Tavistock really kicks off when this original Wellington House entity morphs into the World War II era Tavistock Clinic because they wanted to study shell shock. So we had soldiers coming back from World War I, and they were dissociating. They had whatever PTSD ends up being, right? They were having these issues, and so they wanted to study what was going on with these people. By the way, if you want to support my stream, you can do so right there. If you would hit like and share, we only got 280 likes, 700 people watching. If you want to support the stream, be sure and do so through Super Chats. Is nobody celebrating their BTC gains? I mean, if you want to support me via Bitcoin, you can right here. Shout out to whoever sent $100 in Bitcoin the other day. Appreciate that. Very generous of you. You can support me there, or you can support via Super Chats. But Wellington House, as we said, was, before we get to Tavistock, I wanted to mention that the after World War I, what they decided they wanted to do was focus on the 1936 book by Oswald Spengler, Decline of the West. Now, Spengler wasn't writing what he thought was he wasn't writing some conspiracy plan. Spengler is a famous historian with a kind of unique theory of history, as you guys may or may not know, that history is characterized by these world empires that have a life cycle. So you have the Babylonian era of the ancient civilization society that was characterized by a Magian worldview. If you come to the modern Western civilization of European man, Spengler characterizes it as Faustian, meaning that man in the West has a Faustian bargain and wants to, control and dominate by technology. He's not calling it even a bad thing. He's just talking about his analysis of these phases of history. And he says that Western civilization has a life cycle, a birth, an apex, and then a decline. And he argued that the decline would be marked by certain factors that were already kind of going on in the 1930s. And Spengler, by the way, was not a fascist. I'm not sure why people call him a fascist. He was very critical of Tiny Mustache Man. And Spengler is a very fascinating character. His books are fascinating. We've talked about Decline of the West in the past. But one of the key things that Spengler predicted, and he was not writing this for Tavistock. It had nothing to do with Tavistock. But he wrote a famous book where he said that Western man would be his own worst enemy because eventually Western man would allow the importation, shall we say, of large foreign populations who would then take over his institutions and technology and subjugate and destroy Western man, if you follow me. And that's part of the thesis of Decline of the West. And other book, I think he has another book too. There's a book about Prussian socialism, and then he's got a book about essentially other people taking over our technology and using it, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a ongoing thesis in Spengler. Now the Tavistock technocrats read this and said, hey, that's a neat analysis and all, but what if we utilize that as a strategy to actually break the West and turn it into a socialist world order, which is the only hope and salvation for man? Now, this does not mean that capitalism is perfect, but this is a move from an Enlightenment revolutionary philosophy of, Adam Smith's laissez-faire stuff to the next phase of revolution, which is way worse in my view. And as even Spengler said, it's a famous quote, you may have heard of it. Spengler famously said, you cannot look behind any socialist movement without finding some capitalist supporting it. In other words, if you scratch a socialist, you'll find underneath, as you peel away the layer, monopoly capital support. That's a famous Spengler statement, and Spengler's absolutely correct about that. And in fact, that essentially is the modus operandi of the Fabian socialism that the Tavistock Institute had as its modus operandi, as its strategy and technique. So, to all the Matt Walshes and to all the Daily Wire and the normie conservatives who think that there are no such things as long-term conspiracies or theories or techniques of subversion and control of a society, the Tavistock Institute is the premier example of this. Admittedly, as we will see, we are not just relying on the claims of Coleman. We are going to the actual texts of the history of it and the actual people who worked there with them to craft public opinion, to crystallize public opinion. In other words, I think Lippmann has another book called The Crystallization of Public Opinion. Now, how does this work? How do they do this? Well, one of the key things they came up with was not just war propaganda and doing a lot of, pioneering work in that domain, and not just studying shell shock and, individual trauma manipulation. We're going to get to more of the specifics, what are called future shocks. But they actually came up with ideas about social justice. So in other words, where does social justice warrior come from? Ultimately, Tavistock. They also came up with ideas like mass manipulation through public polling. Now, nowadays with the internet, far fewer people care about polls, and the younger that you get, the less people care. But back in the 1920s and 30s, and let's see, when was Public Opinion wrote? So Lippmann wrote Public Opinion in 1920. Now, Lippmann, we're talking about OSS, people out of the OSS here, right? At that time, because people were very interested in groupthink, and by the way, the Tavistock Institute that put several publications out about groupthink, how to engineer and manufacture groupthink. They understood that people wanted to be with the winning side and the group and not be an outsider, right? That was much more normal, I guess, or commonplace in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? And so they could very easily just make up polls, lie in the polls, and you could, through polling itself, engineer public opinion and consent. In other words, 55% of Americans support going to war. And then the next week, it turns out after the atrocities, 75% of Americans now support going to war. And the grandpa man voice on the radio telling you that 70% of Americans support the war means that all the good Americans are going to now support the war. Because the fatherly grandpa voice on the radio told me that. And I don't want to be an outsider. I want to be a patriot and support my country. We got to go to war. Grandpa radio voice told me we're going to go to war. It literally is that simple. I mean, yeah, it's a whole book, but like the basic principle is that just lie through statistics, lie through polls. The polls don't even have to be real. I mean, who in the 1950s was going to go check to see if the polls were real? Nobody. People were probably, I think, much more deferring to authority at the time. And so they could get away with a lot more back in these days as they were making breakthroughs in social engineering, and the public had not caught on to any of this. Again, remember the very first page of Bernays' propaganda, and Bernays is one of these people working with these people. Remember, we've lectured through the entirety of Bernays' book many years ago, Propaganda. And on the very first page, Bernays says, you think you live in a democratic society where you make choices, but all of your choices are given to you and your choices are manufactured for you, and your desires are given to you and are controlled by an elite of whom you've never heard and you don't know anything about. Now, I don't think that Bernays was directly talking about the, quote, Illuminati. He's talking about the Tavistock Institute, the social scientists and social engineers working at Tavistock, people from the Frankfurt School, to pioneer psychological manipulation through advertising, public campaigns, polling, etc. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about people like Don Draper in Mad Men. As just one example. I'm not saying Don Draper runs the Illuminati. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully we had a high IQ audience over here, right? Remember, Bill Gates was seen in that famous picture a few years ago with the book, How to Lie Through Statistics. So this is a very well-known, precise science. This is not wackadoodle, quackadoodle, made-up tinfoil stuff. This is all very easily verifiable. Walter Lippmann and Tavistock, for example, came up with Bernays, a term that would help the Woodrow Wilson administration convince the American population to be involved in the European foreign conflicts. Remember, the Founding Fathers had an established attitude in America that we would not be involved in European foreign conflicts. This was weaponized when Wellington House and Tavistock came up with the idea of isolationism. Isolationism became a derogatory term when prior to that it wasn't anything derogatory. That's the American attitude. It's America first. That was the attitude, that was the model. But these people came up with a very cunning strategy to attack and to demonize people who would be America first. I'm talking about back in the 1930s, 40s, etc. By saying that they were callous, didn't care about the human rights in other countries. They were insensitive to atrocities, etc., etc. All the stuff that they had tested out in World War I with attacking the Kaiser, the posters about the Hun, H.G. Wells's propaganda posters that he came up with that we've covered in the past. And so social justice demands that America take action and be involved in these campaigns. In fact, the United States will champion and lead the charge, according to the Fabians, in this just world order that they want to establish. I'm not joking, that's from them. Tavistock came up with the idea that in order for this to be successful, we would need a long-term plan of what are called future shocks. These would be shocks and tests to the system. This is not dead, by the way. If you remember, I think even Klaus was speaking this way not too long ago. There will be certain shocks to the system. And if you listen to enough of these people and their lectures and their talks, you'll hear them use this terminology quite often, right? Shocks to the system, future shocks. In fact, one of the global elite themselves, Alvin Toffler, wrote a whole book called Future Shock. That's Tavistock ideology. And the idea was that certain crisis, big-scale crisis events, shock events, are the things that can propel this ideology and this game plan forward. Large-scale crises. That's why almost every global elite text that we lectured through, many of them, as you guys know, how do they always begin? We are in a crisis, crisis, crisis. They always begin the same way. Whether it's Brzezinski, whether it's Friedhof Capra, whether it's H.G. Wells, whether it's Charles Galton Darwin, the books begin with, we are in a crisis, human population, nukes, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that they tested out at Wellington House that was very effective in terms of propaganda was, get this, to call the Kaiser the butcher of Berlin, the beast of the East, etc., etc. They came up with these wild sort of, almost like Trump tweets, right? Like Sleepy Joe, right? Like the and what's funny is that Coleman argues, and I don't doubt this, that when the United States wanted to go after Saddam, they literally just copied and pasted everything that Wellington House had done with the Kaiser. And guess what? What do we see nowadays with all the same types of propaganda? Assad is Hitler. Putin is Hitler. Hitler. Look, Bob Woodward. Putin is the Hitler of our century. Assad is Hitler. Like, are you noticing a pattern? like, so all you do is just slap the person that you want to go after up with a Hitler, right? This is a just endless left tactic. They never get old. They never get tired of doing this. And I mean, I don't care who you are. If you're not a leftist, by default, you're a tiny mustache man. Assad regime. Assad is worse than Hitler. Assad is using chemical weapons. Guess what? That was all fake. Do you remember when they admitted that Assad was not using chemical weapons on his own people? That was all made up. Oh, are you noticing a pattern here? The atrocities against their own people. The butcher of Baghdad, Saddam Hussein. And this works on the dumbed down normie audience. Let's see if we can find any old propaganda about Saddam. Saddam Hussein is worse than Hitler. Saddam is Hitler. So, as you can see, this is a like literally the lowest tier of propaganda, and they still use this. It's kind of wild. Like they've never stopped using this. It never stops. And eventually it becomes this, it doesn't even have to make any sense. Anyone who is not Mao is Hitler, you see. That's the logic of the left here. And you could only get to this kind of a situation with the long-term, in-depth brainwashing and social engineering that the Tavistock Institute pioneered. Now, other key members of the Tavistock Institute, they utilized the Halford Mackinder Heartland-Rimland theory to be the kind of guide for the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the London University and London School of Economics. In fact, we must have a world state to bring in this world order is itself a phrase from Toynbee. So Toynbee, the famous Fabian socialist British I think he was British intelligence, wasn't he? Historian and philosopher Arnold Toynbee is one of the key figures working at Wellington and I think at Tavistock. So if you're looking for key operators and thinkers and movers, Toynbee is definitely up there with H.G. Wells and all these other characters that we mentioned. H.G. Wells' book, The Open Conspiracy, is a key text that outlines the Tavistock Institute's plans. This is not, for those that don't know, and we've lectured through this book for many, many years, over and over and over, this is not a conspiracy book. You understand, this is a book from the very people we're talking about. And it is an admitted plan and strategy from a Fabian socialist working with all of the people that we're talking about, right? H.G. Wells. And the reason he calls it an open conspiracy is that he says that we don't have to hide this. There's no need to make this some kind of a secret thing. It's just simply reality, and it doesn't have to be hidden. Of course, my talk on this never comes up, even though, wait, no, does it? Here we go.
Greeting.
Oh, it comes up on some other person's channel and not my channel, of course. So this is really frustrating because so many of my talks are buried. You can't find half of these anymore. There we go. Amazingly, this one comes up. So I think, yeah. So here is the original talk. This was almost 8 years ago. So we've been talking about this book for 8 years. This is a half and half talk or partial talk. Now he has another book that's equally as important. And well, actually there's more than one. There's God the Invisible King that Jamie and I covered is another H.G. Wells book about the coming world religion. And he has, where's the other one? It's called New World Order. That one might be buried. No, it's not, amazingly. So here's me back when I had carb bloat with a mustache. This is 7 years ago. H.G. Wells' book. Now again, I don't know why anybody at this stage could or would think that what we're talking about doesn't exist and is made up and is crazy talk, when the actual most famous authors and writers of the last century were part of the Fabian Society, working with Tavistock, admittedly saying they want a NWO, admittedly talking about all the stuff in their books, and then you insist It doesn't exist. It's made up, and you're crazy. I'm not talking about aliens. I'm not talking about Tartaria. I'm talking about verifiable public information in books that really should settle. Like, there should be no debate given the fact that these are real texts and these people really are who they say they are. But I would venture that, I would say, what do you think? 90 to 95% of the people who are awake have never heard of these books, never read these books, don't know what any of these things are about. Even though we've been talking about this for almost 10 years, the books are not conspiracy books. H.G. Wells was a high-level Freemason by admission, atheist, socialist, technocrat who wants to depopulate in the family, have a completely controlled technocratic one world order, and what's in Brave New World in 1984 is what they want, explicitly. End of debate. There is no debate about this. If you're debating this at this point, this is your problem. This is a you problem. So far in the Tavistock book, it looks like we're on the right track. So far, we've got good information. And one little ditty that I was surprised to see at the beginning of the book was that because the UK was so envious and hateful towards Germany, they were really looking for, at this Wellington House phase, any ways and means to destroy and bring down Germany as a competitor to the Anglo-American establishment. And so they saw the need, first and foremost, as we said, to control the newspapers. Not just control the newspapers, but to control education and to essentially engineer the public through public polling and consent to flip them to be pro-war. Not just in the UK, but also eventually in the West and the United States. Now, if you heard my lectures that we did in my live talks, you know we went into detail about Colonel Edwin Mandell House and President Woodrow Wilson. Did you know that the 14 points was actually adopted from a Fabian socialist book? The 14 points was the part of the Fabian socialist model for a socialist world. Now, they didn't get all of this at World War I and with the League of Nations. The League of Nations ended up being a failure, even though Colonel Edwin Mandell House and other Fabian socialist operatives working for Rothschild were really pushing to alter America and bring it back under, quote, British Empire. Now, when people hear this, it doesn't mean like the classical British Empire of, 1700s. No, we're talking about a world federalist socialist empire that is the model that John Ruskin and Cecil Rhodes had. Okay? So they realized with the waning of the British Empire and with the rise of America and the American Revolution and all that, etc., that they were not going to be able to rebuild the British Empire as it had been in its so-called glory days. And so when you have that early phase of Rhodes and Ruskin and people, they were talking about the white Anglo-Saxon man through evolution being destined to dominate the planet. Okay, that's true. That is accurate. They did say that. And they had a Darwinian Malthusian worldview even then, and it was connected to the idea of the specific Anglo-Saxon breed and stock of people. However, this changes as we begin to have the ascent of the Fabian socialist model, which agrees with a lot of what the prior model had, but they do not share anything to do with anything pro-white man. The Fabian socialist model says, no, it's not going to be a race or breed of people that is the future. We're going to select specific elite members of any group. It doesn't matter. They will be the leaders of the future. They have to be atheistic, technocratic, etc., etc. That's why George Bernard Shaw, one of the key future people in the movement I'm talking about, has a famous quote where he says, when we get the technocratic order in place, you'll have to come to us, the priest class technocrats, and you'll have to convince us why we should let you live. Because we have a mandate for the good of the survival of the human race to mass depop. Literally. And he says, so remember, this flips in terms of attitude from Ruskin Rhodes' time, away from, quote, Anglo-Saxon man dominance to anti-human attitude, only socialist technocrat dominance. They get rid of all of the RACE elements. This is partly why Tiny Mustache Man is part of the dialectical system that they want to destroy. I'm not saying Tiny Mustache Man was good. I'm saying that that was an older model that these people had discarded. And in fact, if you read the Rothschild book, the Fabian socialists, whether it's eventually Bertrand Russell, the Webbs, I forget, he mentions, I know Bernard Shaw says it, but some of the other keys, they actually say that, no, this model is wrong. In order to get advancement for the socialist order, we will actually have to destroy honky man. You catch my drift? So this attitude changes. And that attitude continues into the model of Tavistock and the technocrats. That is what dominates still to this day. For example, General Wesley Clark famously said, Europe will have to be destroyed. I'm not saying that, I mean, General Wesley Clark had some criticisms of the neocons. Okay, wow, great. That's great. There's a 7 nations plan. Okay, yeah, wow, that's true. That's great. Yeah, but he also is a proponent ultimately of this technocratic Fabian socialist agenda. Thank you guys for those super chats. Appreciate that. Thank you so much, AC, for that big fat super chat. Of course, it looks like AC is going to win, but hey, maybe you guys can top him or you can equal it out. I know a lot of people had some BTC celebrations today. We did hit a ATH a minute ago. Did we pull back a little bit? We're all waiting for, we're hovering around 92.5. Okay. We're all waiting for things to pop off to hit 100K. Anyway. And as you may understand, and you probably are aware, yes, it is precisely this era of Woodrow Wilson, Colonel Edwin Mandell House, where we get the Federal Reserve. Absolutely. And we begin to get Marxist ideas, such as the income tax. And if you doubt that, are you not familiar with the planks of the Communist Manifesto? One of them is the fiat central bank, abolition of the family, inheritance tax. Here it is. The planks of the Communist Manifesto at its very beginning. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Now remember, do not misunderstand what I'm saying here. What guy is wildly wrong? I'm wrong? You want to come on and debate where I'm wrong? I'm literally at Marxist.org. Abolition of private property. A heavy and progressive income tax. Abolition of inheritance. These are planks of the Communist Manifesto. Free education in public schools. Communist Manifesto. So you can see some examples. Centralization of bank and credit in the hands of the state. Guess what? Ultimately, that's the private Federal Reserve, you see. Who's I'm wrong or who's wrong? I want that guy to come debate me. I mean, literally looking at this is the Marxist Communist Manifesto. Now, we're not fighting classical Marxists because the Fabians are reformed Marxists who wanted to align a softer socialism with monopoly capital. So in other words, a liberal economic elite was much more effective than these hardcore extreme policies that Marx wanted right away through the proletariat rising up in bloody revolution and seizing the means of production. That didn't happen. It's not going to happen. And so the Fabians said, we want a gradual, slow kill model using money. And even H.G. Wells, if you guys remember, I don't remember if it's either his New World Order book or Open Conspiracy, where H.G. Wells says to the Marxists of his day, he says, you Marxists are stupid. He says, do you not realize that the only way the NWO will be built is through capital? He says that, don't worry, let the capitalist elite build the infrastructure of a global order. We will then take it over. Not in a one-day bloody revolution where the factory workers stop printing the Funko Pops and they rise up and kill the CEO. No. We're going to wait until they build it, and we will gradually, through permeation and penetration, the long march through the institutions, as Gramsci said, we'll take it over. And our allies will be, and here's the big secret, have always been, big capital. Remember, Spengler was correct when he said, you can never search or scratch below the surface of a socialist movement without finding mega capital behind it. This is the thing that we can never get across to the normie conservatives. Normie conservatives cannot understand this. They will not understand this. This is one of the roadblocks to anything actually ever changing. In order for things to actually ever change, we have to get the right to understand these points. That it is not just the boobs in Washington. The idiots in Washington, dum-dums, and Joe Biden's an idiot. It's not idiocy that's importing millions of people. It's a strategy. And by the way, Coleman said in the 1990s, that's exactly what they would do. Large-scale importation, change the demographics. Boom. With a gigantic underclass, easily turn this nation into a socialist country. It's not rocket science, it's pretty obvious. A gigantic dependent underclass that's imported on the teat of the nanny state makes the whole country eventually socialist. By design. It is not just boobs in Washington. And why can we not get the right to understand this? Why is this so difficult? It's so obvious if you actually read the actual people. Arnold Toynbee wrote, I already took down the Toynbee. So now I got to get this book because this book sounds crazy. Toynbee says, quote, if we are to avoid mass unaliving, he means that humanity will destroy itself, we must have a world state now. It must not have a democratic form to begin with. We must build the world state now. That is one of the most important ideologues of the last century. Arnold Toynbee himself. I have his, history. There's H.G. Wells says Outlines of History, and then Toynbee has another. I forget Toynbee's book, but one of the key figures that we're talking about here. in the British Socialist Empire saying, we must have this. Thus, with the advent of Wellington House that was funded originally by the British monarchy and later by Rockefeller and Rothschild, we would begin to have the institute, the think tank, that would be the seed for which the world would be converted into a world socialist order. And to get back to the character of Bruce Lockhart, we are speaking of this famous British operative because I'll mention just this brief section that he talks about. And again, this is actually correct because I have his memoirs. This is corroborated. We often hear of what Sutton talked about, right, in Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, about the support. Now, apparently, I haven't checked this because I've never read Churchill, and I'm not a Churchill. I think Churchill was a stooge, essentially, of the same people. But apparently, Churchill at one point said, I got to figure out where this is. Maybe this is in his, he does mention a Churchill book at the end. I've never read Churchill, so I don't know which one it is, but he mentions Winston Churchill's book. I don't remember which one. I don't see it, but anyway, Churchill apparently says the transportation of Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, in a sealed truck like a plague bacillus from Switzerland into Russia established Lenin and Trotsky, enabled them to seize Russia by the hair of its head. So Churchill was actually admitting and alluding to the importation of Lenin and Trotsky secretly into Russia via this train, and that they had a bunch of gold given to them, millions of dollars, in this sealed train or truck, transported Lenin and his Bolshevik revolutionaries into the midst of from war-torn Europe into Russia to deposit them to import their revolution, which was not the Russian Revolution, but was actually exported to Russia. When I was privileged to actually study at Wellington House, this is Coleman's claim, I was reading through Arnold Toynbee's papers. I found then Bruce Lockhart's private papers, which led me to the conclusion that without Toynbee, Bruce Lockhart, and British intelligence, and without the complicity of at least 5 European nations, the Romanovs would not have fallen to the Bolsheviks. And by the way, Sutton says the exact same thing in his chapter on David Lloyd George, Lord Milner, and Lord Milner using Bruce Lockhart as the go-between to the Bolsheviks. This account must of necessity be limited to Tavistock's participation in this affair. It will not be a complete account of the skullduggery, because according to Milner's private papers, Lord Milner, his aides through Tavistock were contacted through a fellow named Fritz Platen. Fritz Platen was a famous socialist. Milner was a leading Fabian, and although he eventually ended up scorning Sidney and Beatrice Webb, they were all still working on the same team. It was Fritz Platen who planned the logistics of the trip that oversaw the arrival of the revolutionaries to Petrograd. This was confirmed and borne out by the Wilhelmstrasse files, of which I was able to gain access. These files were open to certain people, allowed to read them. They tallied very closely with Bruce Lockhart's account in his private papers, as well as what I was able to read from Lord Alfred Milner and the betrayal of Russia. Now remember, Sutton says the exact same thing in his book, on naming all the same people in the exact same account. It appears that Milner had many contacts amongst the Bolsheviks in addition to Lenin. In fact, it was to Lord Milner that Lenin went when he needed money for the revolution. Armed with a letter of introduction from Fritz Platen, Lenin met with Lord Milner and laid down his plan for the overthrow of the Romanovs in Christian Russia. Eventually, to seal the deal, Milner agreed on condition that he could send his agent Bruce Lockhart of MI6 to oversee and supervise day-to-day affairs and how Lennon was handling the job. Lord Rothschild and the Rockefellers demanded that they be allowed to send Sidney Riley. Sidney Riley. Did you hear what I said? All of this seems to line up with all the other research and stuff that I've talked about. And I am looking forward actually to reading Dr. Richard Spence's book on Sidney Riley. Now, I have a mainstream normie book on Sidney Riley, but I guarantee you that Dr. Spence's book is going to have the actual details. In other words, if you really want to understand the last century and what all was going down, you got to read Quigley's text in toto. You have to read the Ratu book. And you have to go into these famous spies. You got to go into the Bruce Lockhart memoirs. And although I've read some of this, I haven't read the whole thing yet. You have to go through these rare texts like Trust No One, The Secret World of Sidney Riley by Dr. Richard Spence, whom we've interviewed. Same Richard Spence that wrote the book Secret Agent 666 about Crowley. Now, did you catch that? Coleman accurately here mentions Rothschild and the Rockefellers demanded that they be allowed to send Sidney Riley to also supervise the transfer of Russia's natural resources and the gold that were held in the Central Bank of Moscow. Lenin agreed to this, allegedly, and then Trotsky as well. To seal the bargain, Lord Milner, on the behalf of Ralph, gave Lenin 60 million pounds of gold. The Rockefellers then contributed 40 million pounds of gold. Countries in complicity with this and the sealed train affair were Great Britain, Germany, Finland, Switzerland, and Sweden. The U.S., however, was not directly involved at this time. However, at the orders of President Wilson, it was this is where you get Wilson granting a passport through Fritz Platen, through German espionage operatives, to Trotsky. The Wilhelmstrasse files confirm that the carriage was remain locked. No one was able to board the carriage without Fritz Platen's permission. The train would have extraterritorial status. Passports were not to be checked. Tickets would be bought at regular prices. There would be no security issues. And if you remember, Sutton has a whole chapter where he talks about the Wilson administration getting Trotsky, or Lenin or Trotsky, I forget who, their files and passports so that they could do all this. So, $100 million in gold was the price of the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, why would they want that? Well, if you remember, the revolution in Russia was actually run out of one of the, basically a block of New York that the Rockefellers owned. And we've detailed this, the Sutton book covers the entire history, what each department and building of that Rockefeller complex was doing. They're literally running the Russian Revolution out of this building, you see, out of New York. So it's run out of New York. A lot of different individuals, entities, corporations, people, family, banks contribute. And why do they do this? Because Russia has some of the most valuable resources on the planet. And this was the creation of a whole new capital market. If the revolution is successful, if there's a destruction of Russia, and if the Western capitalist elites are supporting the revolution, then Western companies and corporations who have bought into this, pay to play, can come in and loot the place. It's not that sophisticated. It's fancy with all these fronts and shells and this and that. is just causing a disturbance and looting a country. That's all it is. And that's really what modern warfare is. Destroying and looting and then rebuilding and making the people that you conquer pay for it. It's not that sophisticated. It's literally just warfare and subterfuge to take shit. That's it. At its most basic level. Now, to get back to Tavistock. Tavistock had not only pioneered studies. Now, remember, they got their start through a gigantic grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation's giant grant is the significant money that facilitated the creation of what we know of as Tavistock. Now, remember, at this time, it's just Tavistock Clinic, which becomes Tavistock Institute. This expands to be a multi-tiered facility, places all over the UK. And it eventually becomes the spearhead of, you got it, TRANZ movement. In fact, the last 10 years, if you're wondering where all this came from, do you think it just popped out of nowhere? Suddenly, Bruce Jenner is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Does anybody read Sports Illustrated? I don't even know if that exists. But Woman of the Year, Bruce Jenner. What? Where does this come from? Do you think that it just all sprang out of nowhere? No, it's not one damn thing after another. A lot of things are strategized and planned. Far more than what the normie conservatives think. We don't even consider the normie liberals are not even, they're out to lunch. They can't think. The normie conservatives can at least think, but they're so arrogant and delusional and prideful that they cannot admit that evil strategizes and plans. I don't understand how they, every normie conservative will have these fetishes about, I love to study, I love to study the techniques and tactics of D-Day and Normandy and the invasion and the 23,000 tanks in this day and 43,000 troops were over here. And then know all this stupid shit about things of specifics of World War II. But they can't figure out that strategizing happens at a bigger level than a war. Did the strategy and the espionage just quit after the war? And yet, the mainstream media has said for 7 years that Russia has conspired for many, many years to subvert our elections and to control our country. And all I saw today on Twitter in the normie, I looked briefly at the normie sphere. Do you know what they're all saying? Literally all saying Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian agent. She was cultivated by Russia. Just like no evidence. They just say because she doesn't want to continue the policies, she's a Russian operative and agent. It's just ridiculous. No, normie conservatives. Not everything is planned. We don't go full schizo. But far more is planned than what you think. And it's precisely the reality of large-scale espionage. Let's call it, you want to call it espionage? Is that better for you? Is that more acceptable to you? Because publicly, according to mainstream media, the spearhead of the TRANZ movement for the last decade or more has been Tavistock. They had the largest clinic in the world about this. Do you think it's accidental that it's all the same goblins I'm talking about that are behind this clinic? It's like in your face, dummies. What is wrong with you? What is the major malfunction to where you can't see this when it's right in your face, admitted in mainstream news? In fact, it was so egregious, as Jack Sparrow says, that 2 years ago they had to shut all this stuff down because they were just openly trying to brainwash youths into snipping off peepees. I mean, it would take you 2 seconds to look up on the internet the hub of TRANZ stuff from the establishment. It happens to be Tavistock. Hello. You can't figure this out? Well, I'm economic conservative. It doesn't exist. I don't want to be a tinfoil hat. It literally takes you 2 seconds to look up Tavistock gender. The foremost clinic in the world had to shut down over this. Now, I wonder where and how they came up. Why would the Tavistock Institute be involved in this? What does this go along with? Are there any other ideologies that this links up with? Like depopulation? Like that kind of stuff? So far, we've seen Coleman, even when he's making speculations or claims that we can't exactly verify, he's pretty much so far doing good. Like I'd say he's 80% pretty much right so far. We haven't seen anything that's totally hard to believe or whatever. And he points out that one of the things that they studied early on, Tavistock, in the 1920s, when I guess it was still Wellington House or whatever. Let's see, what year is Tavistock? 47. Tavistock Clinic becomes Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in 1947. So the clinic becomes this more of a think tank at this point. And how does it become so powerful? Well, not just Rockefeller, but you'll notice, according to the public record, giant corporations begin to be interested in their research. We have Ahmedabad Manufacturing, Shell, Bayer, Glacier Metals, Unilever, the National Coal Board start contracting and utilizing research from the Tavistock Institute. So you understand this is growing into a corporate level entity that is used or consulted or contracted out to do research. So maybe Shell Oil says, hey, Tavistock, we want to create a much broader consensus and community amongst our customers. What are the techniques of groupthink and cult behavior, literally, that we might utilize to create that for our market share? And Tavistock says, let us go to work on that for you, you see. The CIA says, Tavistock, we want to study PTSD in soldiers coming back. I don't know. I'm just speculating and throwing out things that are probably the case. We want to study PTSD in soldiers that came back from Iraq. Ah, yes, we'll do that. We have decades of research on PTSD. Let us do that for you. You see. So this is what we're talking about. Corporations, entities say we want to create a new market, for example, of, here's one for you. And I'm just throwing this out, but I guarantee you something like this happened. Let's say you're, what's the big makeup companies? Sephora or Maybelline, I don't know, whatever makeup companies are. Makeup company says, how do we create a new market? Well, right now, half of the population uses makeup, the women. What if we can sell the idea that the other half of the population, it's cool and trendy and gender affirming and safe. It's a safe space for dudes to wear makeup. And Jeffrey Charles is promoted to the top of everything for years. Why? Because there's a vested interest that certain companies have. We're just talking about the money level. We're not talking about the big social engineering, just the money level. Okay? Wouldn't Sephora do well if the other half of the population potentially now is going to start wearing makeup on a large scale? Of course. And that's exactly what they did. The large makeup companies literally start putting men in their ads wearing makeup. TRANZ stuff. So just at the money level, Normies ought to be able to figure that out, even though they can't. But beyond the money level, there's a deeper agenda at work. Exactly. Dudes at Sephora, full on, dressed like ladies. Exactly. What was studied, here's the thing. What was studied is something I told you about a few streams ago. In the 1920s was the mini SEX revolution in the 1920s. Did you know in the 1920s there was a mini SEX revolution? Now, and you might think this is not, for this time, this was a huge deal. So in the Roaring 20s, there was this mini SEX revolution, which, by the way, Tavistock promoted and was studying and wanted. There was a mini free love thing going on in the 1920s. The women started moving their dresses up. And so to have and show your leg an inch or two above the knee was like scandalous, right? So this image right here, this kind of stuff, and this was in a lot of the movies at the time. And not only that, to drink alcohol, I didn't actually realize this until I was reading this book. In the 1920s, women drinking alcohol in public was seen as scandalous. Now, I mean, just imagine, like, the stuff that we think is scandalous is like nothing compared to what the 1920s thought was scandalous. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that we have to go back to the 1920s I think some of this is a little bit ridiculous. But wherever on the scale or the spectrum you think it is, like in terms of ridiculousness, I don't think it's that big of a deal if a woman has a drink in public. That's kind of ridiculous to me. And a skirt being an inch above the knee, I mean, come on. But for the time, that was seen as revolutionary, you see. So regardless of what the actual right standard is, if you think about it in terms of social engineering, these people are studying how this works and how this affects people at that time for where they want to take the revolution in the future, you see. So the little revolutions are being studied to push the envelope in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That's the way, by design explicitly, the Fabian socialists were thinking. This is also, and I haven't proven this, but I'm pretty sure this is where the it girl comes from. So I think the first it girl was Clara Bow, right? And they realized back at this time, let's see. Yeah. We could control society not just through this goofy, news stuff where the newsman comes on and says 75% of Americans support the war. It's time to go to war, boys. And then everybody wants to go to war. Well, much more effective than grandpa radio voice would be the babes of the time like Clara Bow. If Clara Bow bobs her hair and smokes cigarettes and bops around and whatever she does in her little flapper stuff, that's way more effective for social engineering because now all the girls want to be like Clara Bow. The social engineering of the star, you see, the celebrity, the star. And then all the girls are suddenly acting and dressing like Clara Bow. And this is so powerful, especially for women. It's kind of crazy, right? And they're not going to pick ugly people. You had Clara Bow and then Joan Crawford, who becomes basically one of the most iconic, hugest Hollywood women of all time, right? She follows suit. She becomes the it girl. She's icon of Hollywood and all kinds of crazy stuff for the next several decades. And I mean, I have to admit, she is a very talented actress. I'm not hating on Joan Crawford. I think she's pretty, just from a talent standpoint, like she's pretty wild, just as an actress. But the social engineering is pretty much next level. You also get this with, what's her face? I can't stand Betty Davis. I can't stand Betty Davis. Her movies suck too. It's like one good Betty Davis movie. Same situation. She's also it girl at the time, flapper, all this kind of stuff. Back in the early 20s, 30s. And I think, by the way, she became a witch. Her daughter, I think, says she became a witch, which is crazy. Not surprising. But my point is that, okay, so even in the 1910s, 20s, with these early it girls, they are being studied for the manufacturing and engineering of social revolution. And he argues that, oh, by the way, this is also prior to the Hays Code. You guys remember this? So if you watch, for example, a movie like Rain with Joan Crawford, which is one of the most famous early, I think it's her most famous early film. This is really scandalous because in the movie in 1932, she plays a prostitute on an island who has these long arguments with this Puritan minister. And it's really like the film is like degraded quality, but it's a very famous, old school Hollywood 30s film. This was really edgy for the time, but the weird part was that this is right prior to the Hays Code. So they could actually almost do pretty much I would say rated R stuff, and maybe even a little bit of nudity at this time in movies. Especially, this is right after silent pictures, so this is like the beginning of the talkies. But then the Hays Code comes in, and the Hays Code was intended to counteract this kind of stuff in the movies. And I think the Hays Code was largely promoted by Catholics. It was in effect from 1934 to 1968. So notice that date, 1968, right in the middle of the 60s countercultural sexual revolution. You get the removal of the Hays Code. And I mean, look, it was definitely better under the Hays Code, but I mean, there's some really ridiculous stuff. Like the Hays Code would you couldn't have a kiss on screen. It's like, what? And like if you had a bedroom, you had to portray. This is where we get the two beds, right? Two beds. That's kind of weird. So I mean, it was a little too far on the Puritan side, but way definitely in the right direction of today. Yeah, rare Catholic win, exactly. I mean, definitely we'd rather have the Hays Code than like Rocky Horror or any of this kind of garbage. Yes, rare Catholic win there. But point being is that they were studying, according to Coleman, and I think he's probably correct, the sex elements of the silent era film stars. And this was before the Hays Code, and this is when they could get away with a lot more. By the way, if you've seen the movie Babylon with Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt, it was actually a really good movie about the history of Hollywood. The beginning of the movie, when they're doing the silent pictures, is pre-Hays Code, and that's why you see them doing all this kind of crazy stuff. Because you're like, how could they do this crazy stuff in the 1910s and 20s? Well, that's because they didn't have laws about this yet. Now, moving on to the key characters of the phase of Tavistock proper, when we get these research units, and they start setting up units that deal with all kinds of stuff, all the way up until today. The units are, for example, it says human resources. So I would venture that human resources itself probably comes out of Tavistock. Just the whole idea of human resources is probably a Tavistock invention. Human Resource Center, Center for Applied Social Research, Institute for Operational Research, British Operational Research Society. Now, a lot of this sounds really boring, but what they're doing is literally giving corporations the structure that corporations have. So, for example, when you go to a company and they have an HR manager and it's some, big old fat bitch who's talking to you about, you being a racist. That's from Tavistock. When you go to the grocery store and there's a employee of the month, that's from Tavistock. The military, they contract to Tavistock. How can we get our special forces units to have more groupthink and less independent action? Tavistock. All of this. It's all Tavistock's. Now keep in mind, this also kind of bursts the bubble of the libertarian versus government dialectic. Because Tavistock is 100% united with the corporations, and they're 100% united with the British government, the US government, CIA. So there's no either or here. This is a public-private type of entity. What Coleman calls, I think correctly, the world's foremost brainwashing entity. So who are some of the key figures? Some of these you probably heard of. Some of the most important, outstanding figures of the earlier phase, this, or I guess you say middle phase of Tavistock, when we getting into the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Many of them are mentioned here. Let's see. He mentions Dr. Kurt Lewin, who is also Frankfurt School. Frankfurt School overlap. Major General John Rawlings Rees. Whenever we did this previous talk, which I can't find, I don't know where it is, we covered John Rawlings Rees extensively. H.V. Dix. And who is H.V. Dix? Well, he just happens to be the author of the official academic history of Tavistock. W.R. Bion, who has countless Tavistock publications. Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead, the famous fraudster woman, wife of Dr. Gregory Bateson of MK Ultra fame. So notice now we're having overlap with MK Ultra through Dr. Gregory Bateson. Margaret Mead, the famous noble savage person. Remember, are you aware that it turns out that Margaret Mead was a fraud? She was faking stuff. Her research on indigenous peoples and all that, it was all just gibberish. It was all fake. Noble savage, all this stuff that Margaret Mead was pushing, that was all baloney. Well, she's out of Tavistock. And her husband, Gregory Bateson, is out of Tavistock. But these are the same people who go on, as we said, to create Michigan University's Institute for Social Research. And what do we get from the ISR? Critical studies, critical theory, critical race theory.
Critical race theory is an academic field focused on the relationships between
Shut
social
up, Siri. Siri, hush. I didn't ask you anything.
Okay.
You see this giant, menacing, Soviet-looking concrete block entity that we covered the other night? Institute for Social Research. Why, yes, it is everything evil and as menacing as you would expect. And we looked up the 100-year history anniversary interview with the ISR. Now remember, this is at the university level, and this is university goblins pushing all their university stuff, which is usually where the goblins are. The Frankfurt School and the Tavistock Institute, they permeate and penetrate institutions, including academia. And this goes on to talk about, oh yes, we were set up to push things like Adorno's Frankfurt School critical theory. And that leads to critical race theory. So when you hear all this stuff about critical this, critical that, and they're talking about Habermas, Horkheimer, Adorno, all the Frankfurt School people, Habermas. Institute for Social Research. And why were these people important? This is just a recap a little bit of what we talked about the last time. Because who aligned themselves with the Frankfurt School? The CIA and its predecessor, the OSS. Is that a conspiracy theory? No, Bertrand Russell talked about it openly. In fact, we found this academic guy's Gigantor. This is almost a book. Is this it? No, this isn't it. No, this is it. Let's see. No, that's not it. There's another, some guy wrote like a massive, like book length level thing on this that we looked at the other night. But regardless, we'll just go to straight from the mouth of the establishment. Foreign Affairs Magazine. Reporting on a book that was published. I should get this book, by the way. The Frankfurt School at War. The Marxists who helped explain the Nazis to the OSS, to the CIA. Franz Neumann, Herbert Marcuse, Otto Kirchheimer. War makes for strange bedfellows. Among the oddest pairing is the World War II production that was the bringing together of Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, precursor to the CIA, and the German Jewish Marxists that helped the United States understand and combat Tiny Mustache Man, the OSS and CIA, together with the Frankfurt School. Okay, so all these academics, nothing to do with conspiracies. It's all academic literature. Now, briefly here, before we get into the Tavistock studies of what they call three-system response to stress. Three-system response to stress. I wanted to look through the official history of Tavistock, according to one of its Tavistock luminaries, H.V. Dix. And we're going to just look and see who all is referenced as being directly connected to and having a relationship with Tavistock officially. Maybe Coleman is making all this up. Maybe it's not true. Now remember, this book was printed in 1970, but was obscure and was reprinted in 2015. So it was really difficult to check up on a lot of this material unless you had access to a large library with a lot of research material, or you could find this book prior to 1915. But as we go through the text, we find that the Carnegies are mentioned and play a very important role. So the Carnegie Endowment, that has a direct connection. The British government absolutely has a direct, important connection to Tavistock. The famous geneticist, I think, is he a geneticist? Hans Eysenck. And he's famous because I think he lost an award recently because he is a eugenicist. German-British psychologist Hans Eysenck. He's a famous... He won some award. I'm trying to remember. And they took it back because someone found some place where he was talking about racism. And so even if you're in the establishment and you push the establishment positions, here we go, the controversial Hans Eysenck. And guess what he says that so can you guess what he says is so controversial? Now I'm not saying he's a good person, but he dared to say that there's a correlation between various ethnic groups and IQ. There you go. That's it. That's enough to get you losing your rewards from the establishment nowadays. Anyway, Hans Eysenck had a key role connected to Tavistock, the Josiah Macy and the Macy Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the World Health Organization, Rudolf Hess. Interesting. Why would Rudolf Hess be related to Tavistock? Well, Tavistock actually was very interested in the propaganda of Hess and the Tiny Mustache Man entities. They don't believe the story of Tiny Mustache Man and the propaganda, but they're interested in the techniques. That's why. Studies about hypnotism. Oh, interesting. The Institute of Child Psychology. Institute of Child Psychology. Oh, you mean, yeah, to push gender affirming care, you see. The history of IQ and intelligence studies. Now, I'm not saying that all IQ and intelligence studies are wrong, but that information can be studied and used for nefarious purposes. Carl Jung. Did you know Carl Jung had a deep, important connection to Tavistock? And if you remember, Carl Jung was a member of what intelligence agency? He's Agent 488. Yes, Carl Jung was a member of the OSS, and he reported, and his documents are public, where him and Alan Dulles is what I'm trying to say. Their communiques back and forth are public. And so, no, Carl Jung was not a lot of people thought Carl Jung works for Tiny Mustache Man because he talks about archetypes. No, he was in direct contact with Alan Dulles and worked for the OSS. He even had a name, Agent 488. Kurt Lewin of the Frankfurt School. The London School of Economics. Marital studies. Interesting. What are some of the courses and lectures at Tavistock? Child psychology. Understanding clergy. Medical practitioners, magistrates. Marital studies. Studying the public. Social workers. Studying statistics. Trade unions. War neuroses. Studying teachers. So you can see that they're interested in all areas of society. Edward Mapother. Now that's it. The only reason that name caught my attention, Edward Mapother, is because, do you know what famous celebrity is named Mapother? That is a quiz question for the audience. Royal College of Psychiatrists, Edward Mapother. I'm just playing around right now, just checking out. Wouldn't it be funny? So he studied shell shock for them. And guess what? Not only was he a member of the Eugenics Society, and not only did he provide abobos for women, he was also Skittles, as basically all these people are. What? Yes. Our famous celebrity named Mapother is Tom Coon. Let's see, is this guy related to Tom Cruise? Tom Cruise's real name is William Mapother. I think he's like William Mapother III. That's it. Wait, that's his brother. That's the cousin. Tom Cruise's name is Thomas Cruise Mapother IV. So he's from a long line of Mapothers. Let's see. So his cousin is this dude. I don't know who that is. Anyway, I don't know if he's related to that British dude. I was just screwing around. What else comes up in key areas? I'm just doing a survey here of elements that overlap with the history of personality assessment studies. And by the way, the personality assessment studies, if you don't know, they're actually part of MKUltra. So a lot of these studies and research is also, by the way, directly part of MKUltra. The personality assessment system, I think that I found an old journal, a journalistic entry in a magazine written by John Marks that wrote the MKUltra book. He has a separate piece that he wrote in the 1980s about the history of the personality assessment, and that's actually connected to studies that Abraham Maslow did for MKUltra. Very few people know that. But the reason that they wanted these personality studies, so right, so when people start telling you, I am INF, I'm an INTJ, I'm a TMI, I'm an OPP, whatever all those, that's actually from MKUltra. So next time somebody tries to classify you, say, you can't classify me with your gay ultra stuff. I don't fit your categories, bro. I ain't in no category. I ain't no INT. I ain't in no TNA. I'm in that TNA category. Psychoanalysis. Jungian psychoanalysis. Freudian psychoanalysis. Public relations studied at a very large level. John Rawlings Rees, key character, key figure. Working groups. Group therapy. Group studies. Groupthink. Psychosomatic studies. SEX abuse in kid studies. Social psychiatry. So just studying every kind of social domain you could even think of. Shell shock. Sigmund Freud. Royal Society. Rockefeller Foundation. Eric Trist, UNESCO, World Health Organization. So, according to the mainline history of Tavistock by Tavistock member H.V. Dix, one of the key figures and characters, so far, pretty much every major character, entity, organization, idea has been studied, is part of Tavistock, and is correct. Doesn't mean everything that Coleman says is correct. He might be speculating in areas and going a little too far here and there. But again, I'm going to say so far we're about 80% accurate. I think that's a fair level. And again, I've read all the Wells books that we're talking about. I've read the Bernays propaganda texts, and that all lines up exactly with what he claims. So let's see. Next up. Okay, we covered all that. We covered the Bolsheviks, Sidney Riley, Bruce Lockhart. We covered all that. Tavistock basically is the prior instantiation of also something akin to the Rand Corporation. Now, if you don't know about Rand Corporation, I've done a lecture on the official history of Rand Corporation by Alex Abaya. And Rand Corporation is very similar to it. I'm sure many of the same people from Tavistock also have worked at Rand and vice versa. So a lot of these things, it's similar stuff. If you would like to watch my mini doc that I made 6 years ago on Rand, you can watch it right there. But I think I have a separate talk. Or maybe this mini doc is the talk. I don't remember. I've done so many of these things for so many years. We got to talk here with Burmese. So I did a whole breakdown with Burmese of the Rand Corporation book by Alex Abaya. And I did that because if you remember back in the day, Lord Voldemort did a sit-down lengthy interview with Alex Abaya. You could probably find that on Rumble or something. But Alex Abaya went pretty deep in the book in terms of what he admits. I'm sure it wasn't everything because it was an official history of Rand Corporation by Alex Abaya. But I did read the whole book and we did lecture through it. It is considered one of our global elite texts because it is an official from the Rand Corporation allowing Alex Abaya in to do it. So the book is called Soldiers of Reason. This is an interview with Alex Abaya after he had written the book and published it. Here's other people talking about how Rand Corporation created the American strategy. Basically, it's the brains behind the Cold War. It's the brains behind Obamacare. It's the brains behind how they transitioned America into a service economy out of an industrial economy. That's all admitted in the book. Rand Corporation came up with how to sell war, Desert Storm. They came up with the idea to live film and live stream the Gulf War, which was one of the first times that had been done. It had been the first videoed war was Vietnam, but the first live cast was, I think, the first Desert Storm. That's all covered in the book. Let's see a little bit of clip of this.
I'm Alex Abaya. I'm the author of Soldiers of Reason, The Rand Corporation, and the Rise of the American Empire. The Rand Corporation is the most important think tank in the history of the world, and its scientists and its theories have changed the way that we look at the world and the way...
I think Rand Corporation is definitely up there, probably equal to I think Tavistock and Rand are probably equal in regards to global think tank importance and prowess.
...way that wars are fought, and even the way that we live today. RAND stands for research and development. Of course, the joke always is that there is no development. It's always been just research. RAND has no political affiliation. It's not Democratic. It's not Republican. It's pro-government. It's part of what some people are called the permanent government of the United States. And it's been so since 1948 when it was incorporated. It doesn't matter what administration is in power, they will always turn to RAND to do it.
This is essentially the brain trust, the thinking behind the deep state. So this is you could look at this as not so much the money side of the deep state or the bureaucracy side of the deep state. This is the brains of the deep state.
Studies. The latest instance would be Donald Rumsfeld, who went from being chairman of the board of the RAND Corporation to being Secretary of Defense. It starts in 1946 as the military equivalent in peacetime of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, as you recall, was the combination of civilian scientists and industry power and the Army and the Air Force together combined. They gave us the atomic bomb. Yet menace in Eastern Europe, especially the development of nuclear weapons and how to sight nuclear weapons, and also how to counter the threat posed by the Soviet Union.
In other words, the Rand Corporation is really the brains behind the entire Cold War. The Rand Corporation manufactured, propped up, promoted, agitated, and advocated, and sold the Cold War. That's really where they come into to focus. Now, Tavistock we were talking about at the time of World War II. So Rand is not on the doesn't exist yet. Rand is like what Curtis LeMay. It comes to being out of the Air Force, right kind of at the beginning of the Cold War, if I remember right. So we're not at the point of Rand Corporation yet in terms of where we are with Tavistock, but it is very important to bring up Rand because it's kind of America's version of Tavistock, so to speak. Now, Tavistock tends to focus more on maybe issues of social science and control. Rand Corporation has a much more of a tech-minded bent, right? So there's a lot of engineering studies, tech studies going on at Rand. For example, you may be familiar with the idea of deep underground military bases. That comes out of Rand Corporation, literally. A lot of those older Rand Corporation papers are declassified. For example, Rand put out in the 1950s or 60s or 70s, like how to construct giant underground tunnel systems, right? This kind of stuff. Rand Corporation puts out studies how to sell the American public on Obamacare, literally. Like the Obamacare comes out of Rand Corporation studies. So this is really the brains of the military-industrial complex, is the way to think about Rand Corporation. Tavistock is the UK version concerned with mainly social engineering and social control. But there are a lot of overlaps between these two entities. They're very similar and probably many of the same people.
For the past 60 years, actually, RAND has been at the center, at the forefront of the major changes that have occurred in the U.S. government and that have occurred in U.S. science. RAND wasn't only just important to Iraq and to the Middle East. they're also important to terrorism. Matter of fact, they created the field of terrorism studies. The revolution in military affairs, the transformation of the nation's armed forces that was directed...
Did you hear that? The whole field of terror studies comes out of RAND. And who were many of the early founders of RAND? Neoconservative Trotskyites. Albert Wolfstetter.
By Donald Rumsfeld actually came about from plans that had been gestated by Rand.
Oh, interesting. Like Big Nine type studies. Are you Rumsfeld, Big Nine, Rand? Rumsfeld's at Rand. Terror studies. Rumsfeld right there during Big Nine.
By people who have been affiliated with Rand. You know, they have physicists, and they have economists, and they have sociologists, so you have both the hard sciences and the soft sciences. So they have continued with that. At this point, 50% of the budget comes from the federal government, and the other 50% is for private contractors. That is,
public-private partnership, just like Tavistock. So this has nothing to do with the fake debate of the libertarians versus the big government. By the way, if you want to watch the rest of that, you can watch it there. And again, I don't remember what I titled it, but for my members section, 6 years ago, we lectured through his entire book. So you can go read that in the members section. You'd also try to dig up the old Lord Voldemort, Alex Abaya interviews somewhere from that was probably 2010, 2009. It's probably when that happened. I wonder, just for fun's sake, let's see if we could find... Oh, I remember... So, by the way, if you want the internet as it was in, 2014, you do Yandex, right? Which is like a Russian search engine. So, let's see. Because I guarantee it'll pull up somewhere on Yandex. Here it is. What do you know? And one thing I've noticed about Yandex, which is interesting, is that... So this is not the full interview. The full interview is right there. So
the rest of the hour.
Here's old classic Voldemort from 2010. What's interesting about Yandex is that, have you noticed when it pulls up stuff from YouTube, it's pulling up videos that are not hidden. They're still there. But YouTube no longer pulls up these videos. Isn't that interesting? I don't know what all's going on or how it works. But, for example, this is a video from 2010 that is still on YouTube. But I guarantee you, you're not going to be able to pull that up from YouTube's search engine, right? So here is this is still on YouTube from 2011.
And the rise of the American empire.
beginning, there has been that.
Here is a sit-down interview that Lord V did in 2011. It's still on YouTube. See that? There's the one I was talking about right there. So anyway, if you want the internet as it was in 2014, you have to use Yandex. Y-A-N-D-X. That's everything I've looked for that I remember. Oh, where's that interview from 2010? Where's that article from 2010? I can usually find it on Yandex. So it's basically what Google was in 2010. Who do you think I'm talking about? Who did I literally just play? All right, let's read a couple super chats here. We got 34 JDN says Quantum Tavistock. Yeah, baby, that's what I'm talking about. He's let's see. Mike M sends $3 and doesn't say anything, but thank you so much, Mike M. Elon's Omega chip. Thank you. Excuse me. I think that was AC. Foyo Panky Blank. Diamond rings on my panky panky. I gotta immediately go out and take all of my. I'm gonna take all of my BTC profits I'm going to cash out right now. I'm going to buy the Giantess Diamond Ring, Panky, and Cotton Candy with all of my BTC right now. Literally, that's what I'm doing. Cash out, baby. And have fun. By the way, we're only halfway through. So this is a half talk for the public. If you would like access to this full talk, the rest of Tavistock as we work our way through. Let's see how many more pages we got of information. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yikes. I got 9 more pages of notes. So we got quite a bit more. Maybe I have to make this a couple talks. But thank you so much. AC, $5. If they believe in evolution and dialectics, wouldn't that mean that some of them are fine with Tiny Mustache Man, FASCISM, and that proves strong enough to beat their Fabianism? Wouldn't it just be the strongest evolution? I think that the inner core knows that Tiny Mustache Man was also supported by the same people. That's what is referred to as the inner party. So when he's writing 1984, remember, and he's describing the inner party according to the way that O'Brien tells him about it, right? The inner party is the only group that knows what's going on, and they know that it's a dialectic because the whole book is about the manufacturer-controlled dialectics, right? That's a big part of it. Because remember, the villain, Emmanuel Goldstein, is fake. He's a created entity, a fabled enemy that O'Brien and the inner party control, because the O'Brien and the inner party run the revolution against Big Brother. Controlled opposition. So I think the inner party of people like a Bernard Shaw was probably an inner party person. I think they understood that Tiny Mustache Man could only go so far as he was built up to go. And this is my speculation, but probably modern enemies of the West, like Iran, are in a similar scenario where they're really kind of on a leash and they're kind of a contained opponent, and they're not really a threat to the West or even to the Middle East. But it's helpful to have them there as a perpetual, eternal excuse. And so I don't think anytime soon we're going to have Iran like literally getting rid of Israel. I would not trust the Ayatollahs and the mullahs. I think they're probably compromised stooges to a degree. I mean, why else does the U.S. give these people billions of dollars, right? As well as giving Israel billions of dollars, right? So there's some kind of allowed status for certain bad guys, baddies. I'm not saying that this is everywhere. I'm still working out a lot of these positions and theories. I don't have it all figured out. I think Castro was kind of an allowed excuse villain, because you have these like bad guys that are allowed to stay in certain areas that could very easily be taken out, right? And they only go after the bad guys that they want to for certain reasons, right? They're not really going after bad guys. So, you know, Kim Jong is, he can be the excuse to be the threat and police that region. Castro is the excuse to police this area. Putin, I think there's a degree of real East-West war, but also a degree of agreed, allowed conflicts going on. Now, maybe it spins out of control. Maybe it gets worse. Maybe it's crazier. But anyway, that's my take. So I think the same with the Fabians. Like, from their vantage point, they're not really worried about. I think they have a real commitment to the long-term dialectic and slow kill model. James, $3. Is the CIA Schmeeman connection something that you'll talk about? You talking about Father Alexander Schmeeman? Yeah. So, by the way, this is not controversial. Maybe a lot of people don't know this, but Schmeeman during the Cold War was and did have CIA connections. Will you talk about grandson? I think you mean grandson. I don't know what that means. Grandon CFR. Do you mean grandson? Now, I don't know about this. Are you saying that Schmeeman has a grandson that's in the CFR? And by the way, I'm not even necessarily saying that that makes Father Schmeeman a bad guy. I think a lot of people during the Cold War really, truly, thought, hey, we gotta fight the Soviets. They're gonna take over. But it also could explain, why there's the ecumenist elements within Father Schmeeman. So I've never really been a huge Schmeeman fan. I've read I've read 3 of his books. So I've read the liturgical book. I've read For the Life of the World. And then I have that Church World Mission book, which is really ecumenist. So once I read that, I just didn't care about him anymore. Now you're saying he has a grandson or a godson? Oh, maybe you meant godson. What was your... I think you mean grandson. Okay, so Schmeeman's son goes to Harvard, Columbia. Sergey. He did a movie, Behind the Hatred. I don't know anything about who this person is. So does he have a grandson? Is that this Adam guy? Who is the grandson? I don't know who that is. I'm just trying to find who you're talking about, this CFR. I'm still not. Are you saying Sergey is CFR? Sergey was a New York Times reporter, Harvard, Columbia. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a lot of... that's probably going to be Slavic studies. Yeah, I mean, this is probably like CIA stuff here. AP... I mean, Harvard University is like hive of CIA, Anyway, long story short, there is a connection between the Cold War origins of the OCA and the CIA, and it's pretty well known for people that even the clergy. I mean, clerics are the ones that have told me this. From various jurisdictions, and even from the OCA. Multiple clerics. Seems to me like the OCA was a big psyop for Orthodox to me, but I don't live in the U.S. Massive influence in the St. Sergian Ecumenist Institute. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Rs $600. Wow, thank you so much. Appreciate that, Rs. Thank you for the stream. Well, thank you, Rs, for the support. You and Elon's chip have been great tonight. Lopan, $10. If you haven't already checked out Think Tanks and Power... Ooh, this sounds like a good one. Think Tanks because this is the stuff nobody studies and nobody cares. These are the real people that control and run the world. And you'll notice that none of your normie conservative people ever talk about this. They only talk about the libs. They don't talk about the Rand Corporation and the Carnegie and the Rockefeller and the blah, 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 blah. All the stuff that I talk about for over 10 years. None of them talk about it. But I'm crazy and blah, blah, blah. If you haven't checked out Think Tanks and Power in Foreign Policy, I will definitely, that's right up my alley. Study of the influence and role of the Council on Foreign Relations and the RIA. It's a Macmillan publication from 2004. I'm writing that down. Thank you so much, Lopan. Naj 00, $5. Thank you so much, Naj. Appreciate that. Dr. Eggman, $1. What is the eschatological purpose of Mars and the planets? I mean, I would speculate that the Eastern Fathers speculate that the universe is for man to populate and to cultivate, like Eden was. The whole world was originally going to be Eden, so presumably the universe would be the expansion of Eden. Brendan Massey, $5. I work in the private equity space, Jay, and many have done deals with these large institutions. I have a unique insight into how they use financial tools such as tax-exempt financing to shift capital markets for their agenda. It is very calculated. Exactly, that's a great point. That's an area I don't know much about, but I'm not surprised. But wouldn't that demonstrate that clearly far more is organized and engineered in our world than what the normie conservatives think? No Face Killer, $5. How in the world did the Hays Code let a film like Lolita slide in 1962? Interesting theory. Good point. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe it was they paid him off. I've never seen Lolita, actually, so I know I've seen Kubrick, all the other Kubrick movies, but I've not actually seen Lolita, so I don't know if it doesn't actually show anything. So maybe you could have like difficult themes in a movie, but you couldn't show it. So, but I haven't actually seen it, so I don't know. Colin, $25. I'm a new viewer here. Thank you for this great content. Well, hey, welcome, Colin. Thank you so much for your support. Much appreciated. Hopefully you're learning and deriving some valuable infotainment. We try to provide a mix of both, right? Information and entertainment. So some infotainment. By the way, if you've not made your way over to X to follow me, please do so. I'm almost edging up towards 100K on X. Really looking forward to having a 100K X party. We love to have our parties. It's like the office over here. I'm like Michael Scott, where everything involves the party planning committee. And that's you guys and my mods, the beautiful, wonderful fast boy and fast girl mods that we have. Love you guys so much. You guys are great mods. Love all you regulars. And we got to welcome new people. We're still getting about, I wish the growth was as good as it was on X, but it's not too bad. Like over here on YouTube, we're still getting about 2,000 a month. So we're getting, new people. That's good. Guys, I want to remind you too that I do have a show sponsor, and our show sponsor is the one, the only, the best in supplementation. It is the premier in supplementation, chalk.com, CHOQ.com. If you use the link in the show description, CHOQ.com, it will take you over to their page, and you can find everything that you need for becoming toxically masculine. And it's not just for dudes, there's also some good stuff for the ladies as well. If you enjoy working out, if you enjoy an active lifestyle to try to, keep that body fit, to try to keep them thick thighs like I got, them thick with 3 C's birthing hips like I've got. If you want that thick hip like I got over here. If you want them gains, all of my gains, they go to my hips. I got like super buff built glutes and hips, and everything else is like skinny. It's really weird, but it's also kind of cool. Just kidding. Actually, everybody over here should be heading over to CHOQ.com. Use the promo code J40 if you want to test it out and get 40% off. Yeah, what if I skipped leg and upper body day, and the only thing I didn't skip was hips and glutes? That's all I worked out. And so I have like a giant booty and giant thick hips with triple C's, baby. You know what I'm saying? What if I was like that? I would still have to thank chalk.com. And so we're going to have a little brief message. We got more super chats to go to, but let's hear from our friend Vivek Roboswamy real quick.
Chad Mode is your ultimate natural pre-workout, designed to take your performance to the next level. Chad Mode is for natty beast alphas only. Whether you're hitting the gym, invading a favela, conquering a small village, gambling, burning the midnight oil, mogging on your coworkers, or getting banned from Facebook, Chad Mode gives you the competitive edge you need. It's as simple as mixing 1 or 2 scoops of our fine powder into water or juice, providing you with a delicious, energizing beverage featuring a burst of sweet, organic fruit flavor. Chad Mode will give you the extra edge you desperately crave. Chad Mode stands out from the crowd by excluding artificial flavors, preservatives, sweeteners, and dyes. We've even avoided so-called natural flavors, ensuring a clean and effective formula. Only soy boys and betas guzzle blue dye and sucralose, further tanking their already low testosterone levels. Chad Mode is made in America. Unlike your common TikTok peasant's pre-workout powder, it does not contain Chinese lab-made caffeine and artificial sweeteners that soy boys so often crave. Experience the pure goodness of Chad Mode with Blue Magic registered trademark organic blue spirulina extract, organic lemon, cherry, and organic maple crystals. Forget synthetic caffeine. Embrace the natural power of organic green coffee bean extract. Each dose of Chad Mode mirrors the caffeine kick of a cup and a half of coffee, delivering a surge of energy alongside essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and herbal extracts. Chad Mode will allow you to fire your boss and mog on anyone who opposes you. Chad Mode will give you a dominant and aggressive edge, like a lion hunting a gazelle, where the gazelle is a TikTok gym zoomer macro guzzling sucralose on the daily, edging to TNF videos. Whether you're seeking a high-potency, junk-free pre-workout or a better way to kickstart your day, Chad Mode has you covered. It's not just for men. Chad Mode is a solution for anyone ready to conquer their fitness and life goals, dominate their coworkers, and aggressively gamble their life savings. Don't miss out secure.
Jamie loves the female vitality products like the Shilajit, the ashwagandha. I'm sorry, I got distracted because I was over here sneezing and I forgot to unmute. I have to mute when the ad plays or else it doesn't work right. And sometimes when you click to unmute, it doesn't register because there's so many things running at the same time, and so that slows the computer down. And we got freaking Tom Cruise's face over here further slowing the computer down. Also, guys, remember to head on over to Jamie's channel and watch the show that she premiered with Paranoid American, who we met at Bohemian Grove the day that I got super, super, super sick. The first day where I was basically incapacitated. And Jamie and Paranoid American covered Disney theosophy, and they went really deep into Disney's use of and promotion of theosophy. So be sure and check out that. Chalk is epic. It really is a great product. I mean, the great thing about being a sponsor is, like, I have access to basically infinite chalk. So I take it all the time. I really do. I took Tomcat the last 2 or 3 days, and gave me that energy boost basically to finally get back to working out because of being sick. So I haven't worked out in 2 weeks because of basically just the worst stomach virus ever. But then I took chalk the past couple days and I'm back to working out. So I do attribute that to chalk.com. So once again, Tomcat is my favorite, but there's advantages to all these other products. And so when you head on over there, remember to use the promo code J44Life to get 44% off. Like I said, we only got 10% over here at Ladies, but ladies can make use of this. I recommend the Performance Stack to dudes, but there's other options and other possibilities over there. But this is just the easiest way to go about. If you're a guy and you want to get access to what's the best, then add it to your cart. Use the promo code J44Life, J-A-Y-44-L-I-F-E, and you can cancel at any time. So you're not bound by any contracts or anything like that. If you sign up, you get it coming on the regular. Yeah, I take chalk consistently. Absolutely. I don't take every day. I would say I stagger it to about every other day. I didn't take it when I was sick because I had like severe viral stomach infection. So basically nothing was, my stomach would not accept anything. Not even broth. I mean, it was the worst illness I've ever had in my life by far. I would have preferred like a 1 to 2 day food poisoning over what I had. Like literally. Sarah from Leo, $3. What is your take on Trump's cabinet picks as a reason for optimism or a sign of a repeat? I mean, I think we've got a better crop of people than 2016, right? 2016 was, it seemed like the early picks were like the decent people, and then it immediately flipped to neocons. Is that right? So hopefully we won't. We got some decent, better than we expected. There's a couple bad apples. Maybe we can hope for. I'm liking Trump's rhetoric. You know what I mean? AJ played a clip of Trump today, just like. I mean, we have national emergency on the border, national emergency on the debt. I mean, this is all the right rhetoric. Let's hope that it's not just rhetoric. Ed, $5. What about the abolition of the family and its effects on modern society? Yeah, I mean, this is one of the absolutely central planks of not just Communist Manifesto, but what the Fabian socialist technocrats have had for like ever, right? So, I mean, that's something that we have touched on a lot. I mean, really the whole Depop and all of that is first and foremost centered around the destruction of the relationship between men and women and the family. So a lot of this gender agitation that you see all over the internet, a lot of that plays into what we're talking about in terms of the destruction of the family and thus the destruction of Western civilization. And again, for the criticisms that we would have of Coleman, he did actually accurately predict that Tavistock and the Fabians would literally destroy the family to destroy Western civilization. And again, if you go back a couple nights ago when I covered Frankfurt School, we had Marcuse, Reich, authoritarian personality disorder put out by Frankfurt School, Freud. They were all basically saying the same thing, that in order to have the overthrow of Western civilization, you have to destroy the family. The way to destroy the family is to destroy the patriarchy the way to destroy the patriarchy is feminism, but the only way to make feminism successful is through the SEX revolution. And the way to have that is to bring back goddess worship in feminism. So, yes, we covered that. William $1. It's hard to imagine where many of us would be without the work that you've done, Jay. I can't thank you enough for spelling out these things for a lot of these slow boys. Hey, you guys aren't slow. You guys are learning, and we are making progress, and you guys are becoming fast boys. And that's really what I see my role as. So, yeah, thank you. I'm glad I'm feeling better, too. I mean, basically, I just couldn't do anything for about, although I did do a couple live streams. It took me a while to have the energy to do a couple live streams when I was sick, but I'm fully over the sick now. So, but if you come over to the channel, let's see, Secret Philosophy of the Left that we did 3 days ago. That was Frankfurt School and SEX. And then Psychology of the Left, History and Analysis was also relevant to. So this is almost kind of like a part 3 in this Mindset of the Left series that we've been kind of doing here. So be sure and go back and watch those if you missed them. Go watch Jamie's show, guys. Also, if you want signed copies of my books, you can head on over to the shop at Jay's Analysis. Every book over there is a signed copy. Absolutely, don't worry about it. You don't have to request it. They're all signed, and I usually just make it out to the name of the person that buys the book. Again, that's in the shop right here. I'll show you guys that. And looking forward to Esoteric Hollywood 3. Hope you guys are as well. Getting back to work on that this week. So maybe in the next 3 weeks, I'm going to shoot for the next 2 weeks to have the next 50 pages. And then we'll have 350 pages. But if you want signed copies, if you've not read Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2, go ahead and get signed copies of that, because although the books do stand alone, it will be the completion of a trilogy. So Esoteric Hollywood 3 is going to be called Esoteric Hollywood Sex, Cults, and Apocalypse in Film. It's not just about apocalypse movies, so don't get that impression. It's a lot of movies like the first two, but the last section will be about the apocalypse in Hollywood, because Hollywood is undergoing its apocalypse. At least in the way that we've all known the classical Hollywood studio machine, that's going away. Now, unfortunately, now it's the big tech studio. It's Amazon, it's Apple Studios, right? So, I don't know that it's going to get any better, but Hollywood, at least, is going away. So, maybe there's positive signs for that. What are your top 5 books? Ed says for $3. I have a video where I did top 10 books that are top 15 books that everyone should read. So I would say go to my YouTube channel and then type in top books Jay Dyer. That should bring it up. Let's see if that brings it up. "15 books to read before you die," or top 15 Orthodox books. So you could check out those right there. But thank you for that, Ed. Bebsky, $10. Shout out to Jay and all the high IQ peeps that are paying attention to what really matters. Thank you for all your content and your positive influence. God bless you. Thank you so much, Bebsky. Appreciate that. And guys, remember, you can always support me also at any time. Send a super chat at any time, and I'll read it on the next stream. And this is part 1. So for part 2, we'll work our way through the rest of the Tavistock book for you guys, and we'll grade Dr. Coleman on where he was right, where he was wrong.